actually see now today in terms of that sort of access. There was briefly a Silicon Graphics Unix version, and then a PC version that worked in MS-DOS. And then there was also another Linux version in HPUX. And what we have now today, as I say down here in the bottom, is Red Hat Linux and Fedora Linux, Mac OS X, which is Linux in disguise, and Windows in various flavors. In 2001, Brian Toby developed the so-called EXPGUI program, which provides a graphical user interface for GSAS and allows people who are keyboard averse to use the software. The code between all of these versions is basically identical. There's something that's written in G77 Fortran. There's something like 50 programs and around 800 subroutines, and somewhere around 125 or 130,000 lines of code. There is graphics, as you'll see when you use it, which is described here, that for Windows and X for Linux, etc. And EXPGUI is written in Tibble, and as Brian says, you're welcome to modify it and add stuff to it and send it to us, and we'll include it, perhaps. The point is that we're now, well, almost 30 years on, and the basic structure of this program hasn't changed. It still works basically the same way as it did when it first came out in 1986. Now, what is that structure? First of all, there are multiple programs. They all have specific purposes, either editing the experiment file, or doing least squares, or preparing pattern patterns, or graphical stuff, calculating distance and angles, and so forth. Anyway, there's 50 programs that do all that sort of stuff. The user interface is this thing called EXPEDIT, also EXPGUI. And as I said, it deals with the problem of the complexity of the control file, in which, in order to get things to work successfully, you have to have many different things be correct. Otherwise, the least squares will simply fail for all sorts of reasons. This thing is built as if it was a tree. So what you have to visualize as you're working your way through this, using EXPEDIT, is that you are a small animal crawling around the branches of this tree, which is not able to jump from one branch to another. So in order to get from one place in the tree to another, you have to go back to the trunk and then back around to the branch. Just visualize that, you'll be okay using it. There is a common file structure with all of them, which are all automatically generated within the package. You don't have to worry about these names, except that they would just be generated in your directories. The graphics has both on the screen and also a hard copy. The EXPGUI has the usual sort of stuff on windows and buttons and edit boxes, pull down menus, and all that sort of stuff that people are used to. However, there's not a complete overlap with EXPEDIT. It does not cover all the features of GSAS, and so one should have some facility with this program in order to be able to get into what we might call the nether regions of GSAS. But it also has some useful extra stuff that Brian Toby put in. Okay, the interfaces. This is the EXPEDIT interface. What you see here is a string of single letters, which takes you to different branches of the menu. And if you type a question mark or just a simple return, you'll get a little list that tells you what each of the letters means. And so it's rather convenient for somebody who's lost in there to say, okay, just return and say, where am I, what do I need to do? It's also useful for beginners who need to sort of tread their way through it rather lightly. But the most useful thing is that as you begin to get facility in this thing, you begin to learn what each of these, what the menu for the next thing looks like. And there'll be another string of letters, and you can actually type ahead. And so you can put in a whole string of commands, working your way through multiple branches of this thing all in one line of letters. There's also the possibility of constructing macros using these commands to construct them, read them, and end them. When you enter numbers, and you occasionally have to enter numbers with the coordinates, of course you can enter those, but also this is known, this is interpreted as a fraction, and the appropriate value is put in. Or if you have to put in a large or small number, you can use that. This is something that people miss, and that is that when it asks for a file name, don't bother typing it in. Simply go find it in the appropriate spot in the directory structure, drag the name over from wherever you can find it, put it into this screen that you see. So this program is very complex. There is lots of error checking, that is your errors. It tends to ask a question only once, so it will ask for a space group early on in the procedure and never ask that space group again, so you don't have to worry about it. And it also doesn't ask questions that the user shouldn't have to know. For instance, it does not ask you for symmetry operators, it does not ask you for form factors. All of this stuff is buried in the information that's provided with the system, and the space groups in particular is that you don't put in the operators, you put in the symbol, and it interprets the symbol using group theory and gives you what the operators are. That means you can use non-standard space groups. Okay, a macro file. Here's an example, and it's basically, you can see the single letter command of various kinds. These all correspond to some point in that tree, and then the resulting stuff that it's going to ask for. So for instance, this is to insert an atom, and it gives you the atom name, coordinates, and so forth. All of this looks rather cryptic, but you can, when you make a macro file, you're allowed to put in comments, and that's what these all are. It's comments that got entered in after the actual command. And this stuff then got saved as a macro file. Okay. One of the routines that comes with it is something called PC-GSAS. It works only in Windows, and it looks like this. And it's basically for access to the GSAS programs. It doesn't do anything active at all, apart from simply start a program with whatever experiment name that you define. So here's a little pullback menu of some of the calculations that one can do in GSAS. EXPGUI, as I said, is a standard graphical user interface kind of thing with all sorts of usual buttons, and it also has a thing called live plot, which allows you to plot out the results of a refinement as you go along. Okay. That's enough for GSAS-I, and let me do something as a demonstration, because I'm supposed to do a demonstration. Well, let me do you a demonstration. And the purpose of the demonstration is to show you something about modern computers. They're fast. Okay, very, very fast. This is going to be a complete refinement of fluoroapatite, starting with laboratory X-ray data and a reasonable starting model. And don't blink. It is done. That's how long it takes the computer to do the refinement. Okay? When you try to do this exercise, it'll probably take you a few hours. And that's because it's you thinking your way through the problem. The computer takes no time at all to do the calculations. So there's the plot. And one can even display this crystal structure of it in this rather old-fashioned way. Okay? Okay. That's a demonstration of GSAS. GSAS II. Now you've seen this maze. This is thanks to Lynn McCusker, and I think this is sort of an earlier version of it, she said. What GSAS did is basically do this piece right here, the readmap refinement. And it did the structure completion because you were permitted to calculate Fourier maps and to look at them and search for missing atoms and that sort of stuff that I think you heard about earlier. You could also do things like intensity extractions by Levi and Hawley methods. What else could you do? And not much else. You couldn't do, you had to put it in a space group yourself. You couldn't do any indexing. You couldn't do any integration of images or anything of that sort. You can't do any of this stuff, which is how to solve the crystal structure, except perhaps by Patterson methods, but it would all be done by hand. Yeah, so that was basically what it was focused on, was this part right here in the middle. And I guess what Lynn didn't put in is the sort of stuff that's done with the crystal structure, which is to calculate distances and angles and planes and draw a picture and that sort of stuff. And GSAS would do that kind of stuff too. So what I want to do is to talk about GSAS II, which is a completely fresh start. And one of the objects was to fill in these things that are missing in the beginning part of the data collection, as well as eventually get to the point of filling in this sort of stuff as to how you deal with solving a crystal structure. Because the original GSAS was literally only a refinement package. It would not solve crystal structures. Occasionally I would get an email saying, can you help me solve this crystal structure using GSAS? And I say, no, I can't. That's not what it's for. So what we want to do is start off with this. First of all, it's written in Python, because that's a reasonably modern language. It's in fact a very modern language, and it is very well suited for folks like me to write software. I don't have to worry about all of these details that you have to do in Java or C++ about naming the type of the variable before you even use it, and so on and so forth. And it also isn't dangerous. You can't write stuff that will damage your computer with Python. So there's a few things from the old GSAS Fortran codes that I mixed in. The space group interpreter, for a while, that turned out to be just not reproducible in Python. Graphics uses Matplotlib and OpenGL, and that picture you saw in the beginning is an example of OpenGL. The GUI is something called WX-Python, which is a very standard GUI system of WX, originally written in C++, but I don't have to know anything about that. The math is handled by the two numerical packages, NumPy and SciPy, and the current versions that this is for is Python 2.6 and 2.7, which are pretty current. Okay, so here are the goals. Basically, you want to cover the data analysis from the raw data to the final result. The same premise is GSAS, namely combined data analysis, multiple data sets, multiple histograms from where they come from. And then a complete system in a modern, easily accessible language, and that's Python. With a modern graphical interface, and that's using WX. By definition, it's open source. When you get it, you get the source. That means you can modify it. You can't send it back to me. You can send it back to me, but you can't put it back in the depository. That makes sense. It'll run on all modern platforms, so Windows and Linux and Mac and stuff like that. And it'll look pretty much all the same on all of them. That's the idea. We'll not be shy in using little bits of the old GSAS where it's appropriate. And right now it's aimed at X-ray scattering because after all that's where I work at an X-ray source. And neutron, particularly time-flight neutrons, will be in the thing as time passes. And it will be more general. GSAS GSAS stands for General Structure Analysis System, so it would be more general in the sense that it will include small angle scattering, PDF, and various and sundry reflectometry type calculations. Here's a screenshot. There's a 3-frame layout. There is the main menu frame, which shows the data tree, and it sort of takes its philosophy from the old program, because if you look at the experiment volume, you quickly realize it is basically a tree of information. It's also another way of looking at it. This is a dictionary of information too. So the two ideas are combined in this, because many of these things are described as Python dictionaries. Really nice, convenient way of dealing with data. So that whenever you select an item in the data tree, then the data tab, which is this one, will then show up with whatever is appropriate for that particular data. In this case, it happens to be under one of these phases. I think it's this one here. And then the draw atoms tab, which shows this stuff corresponding to this crystal drawing. There is a menu associated with this particular type of data. And as you change from one kind of data to another, the menus that would appear on that bar will change. So there's no point having access to a menu item that doesn't do anything with respect to the data being displayed. So that's also the other part of the philosophy. Show you what you need, don't give you a lot of clutter. The graphics window is, in this particular case, using OpenGL on a MATLAB type window, matplotlib window. And this the code will then, with the mouse operations, allow you to twist this thing around and move it back. Okay, another screenshot. This one has a bunch of powder patterns, which are sort of stacked up here in a sort of expanded waterfall plot. The one that's actually being dealt with is this guy here in the middle, where the points are being drawn as a bunch of little crosses. And it's shown the result of a peak fitting operation where you have the calculated peak, a vertical blue bar that shows the location of the reflection. Somewhere buried in this mess down here is a difference curve. There are controls down here for changing, for zooming in on bits of this pattern, or zooming back out again, or recovering the original display. And there is, this is a fairly slow process, so there's a little progress bar that shows you how it's doing this fitting. Again, here's the data tree. This is what I looked at, which is actually the peak list. And here is the peak list. You can't see this hidden behind the plot. And down here is the console, which some text output will show up. In this particular case, the results of the refinement for the peaks. On 2D images, GSAS II will read in any two-dimensional data image that I could find at Argonne. So what is that? Well, that's everything, including MAR345 files to various and sundry TIFF files that are generated by things like gene detectors and so forth. It'll read Pilatus files. All of these files are sort of a little bit different from each other, but this thing will read any of them. And this is showing the calibration and what's permitted. And if you look at this thing carefully, you notice it's really rather skewy because all the plots are ellipses. Actually, I see them as circles over here. But these things are, severely. This detector has been tilted 45 degrees to the incident beam. You may ask why to do that. Well, some people just do that kind of thing. The other thing too is that if you can deal with, if I can deal with detectors which are tilted by this much, then when it's slightly tilted, I'm getting the right answer as well. And one of those things that involve the right answer has to do with this little set of crosses, which marks the center of each of the ellipses, which is not at E position. That's a sort of mathematical thing is you can dress up the plots by choosing some color scheme. This is something called paired. You can do the classic black and white, or make them all green, or whatever. There's literally dozens of choices. Here's another view a bit later for integration. You can chop the image up into pie-shaped sections. You can take the pie-shaped sections and shift them around so that you can start. This sort of solid line shows the start of the pie-shaped pieces, so that you can put it anywhere you want. And you can set the upper limit on 2 theta, the lower limit on 2 theta. There are masks that you can put in and block out parts of the image to say, don't integrate this. Spots and arcs and rings and polygons, and I'm not showing any of that, but all is there. So this thing is an effective replacement for 2D. Even better is there's unlimited workspaces. You can load in as many images into this thing as your computer would handle. And you can do things like sums and differences between the images. And as I said before, it will read everything I can find at APS, which probably covers all the possibilities, at least I sure hope so. When you do plots, excuse me, when you do plots, you can do either waterfall plots, something like this, or you can do contour plots. This shows a sequence of 180 pattern patterns, and there is a place where there's obviously a phase transition right here, as somebody changed the temperature of their sample. When you have a pattern, as I say down here, you can pick out peaks, fit them, and index it using a variation on the algorithm originally developed by Coelho, and then this part of the Topaz. So it works just as well as that one. It's a little slower, but it works. There's also computations for PDFs, and you can do a whole stack of them. In this case, those 183 pattern patterns were subject to PDF calculations, and this is a stack of 183 PDF images. That just starts down here someplace. It's kind of boring in the first 140 of them. Showing what happens in the PDF is supposed to space transition between this material, aluminum drive, and aluminum metal. And the setup for PDF calculations is very simple. This is really still under development. This is basically the first cut at it. And the most impressive thing in some sense is this little slider here, which adjusts one of the corrections that you have to do. And you can sit there and slide that thing back and forth, and the PDF will simply change because it uses fast Fourier transforms in calculations, and it is very, very fast. So you get an instant response basically to adjusting this parameter. The structure drawings include the ability to draw polyhedra, as well as manifold radii and all the usual sort of stuff. And you can select this by individual atoms or atom types, as we see here. Those are oxygens, these things are hexafluoride antimony anions, are cations. So, future is basically to try to fill in the rest of the maze. All the things that are missing. You can read that little list. It's quite a long list, and one can go on and on and on and on. There's much stuff that one cares to do to fill in as much of this maze as possible with this new code. Right, availability. First of all, this is where you go. For both GSAS and GSAS-II. GSAS-II is available. You have to be prepared for no instructions. But, you're smart people, right? You will find GSAS and EXPGUI under the EXPGUI. By the way, this subversion sort of covers a whole lot of other packages written by other people at APS. So it's not the only thing in there is GSAS stuff. the server under GSAS will find the installation kits for all 3 packages. So you can just download them while you're here and work on it. The GSAS II is under something called PC-GSAS, and PC-GSAS examples in trunk. There's not much instruction for how you run it, but you will need Python 2.6 to 2.7 and these packages, which you can do all yourself, or you can just do it from this company called Enthought. And academics get charged nothing for getting their packages, and commercial people, it's a really modest charge of a couple $100. You will also find in there 2 other little amusing programs. One's called F-Prime, and another one's called Absorb, which is in this entry in the Subversion server. These 2 guys are things that are the first things I wrote in Python. And so it was basically a practice as to how you write stuff in Python. And what F-Prime does, people may be familiar with the old F-Prime programs used for calculating where the real and imaginary part edges are. It's useful. It's used a lot at synchrotrons. Well, this is a new updated version of it that displays the scattering factors, and you can actually change the energy and watch the scattering factors move relative to each other because of resonant scattering. And Absorb is useful because it allows you to check to make sure your sample size isn't too big for the absorption problem that you have. So I remember this morning there were people talking about, well, what do I do if I have a highly absorbing sample in a capillary? Well, use the Absorb program. It will tell you how big that capillary has to be, or how small it has to be, in order to get the X-rays through your sample. Very useful little tool. A little bit of a plug for ATS and the powder diffractometer with 11BM. Go to this website, which is the one for our beam on 11BM, and you'll be told about it, which is a 12 detector analyzer diffractometer, high resolution, and it has a mail-in program. And the way that works is that you submit a short proposal asking for 1 8-hour shift to run up to around 8 samples, because the standard sample time is 1 hour. We probably will accept it unless you violate some rule. And when that happens, you will then get, after some exchange of emails, you'll get sent little magnetic bases, the same as used by the